On March 15th, 44 BC, Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times and died, which is unfortunate for him, but it was even worse for the San Antonio Spurs. Because without Caesar's assassination, the 2026 NBA Finals might have looked completely different. Most people think this only affected Rome, but those people have clearly never watched basketball. Because while historians are busy talking about republics, empires, dictatorships, civil wars, and the slow collapse of Western civilization, they completely ignore the most important consequence of Julius Caesar's death: the New York Knicks winning the 2026 NBA Finals. And today, I'm going to prove that the death of Julius Caesar directly caused the Knicks to defeat the San Antonio Spurs. But so is letting a 7-foot alien play basketball in Texas, and everyone seemed fine with that, so we're moving on. Now, before we get into the basketball side of this, we have to start with the crime. Julius Caesar was one of the most powerful men in Rome. He had power, he had influence, he had enemies, and unfortunately for him, those enemies had knives. A lot of knives. On the Ides of March, a group of Roman senators surrounded Caesar and assassinated him, and most historians will tell you this moment changed Rome forever. Which is true, but also deeply incomplete. Because yes, Caesar's death did change Rome, but it also changed Europe, and then America, and then basketball, and then eventually the San Antonio Spurs' ability to win an NBA championship. Now, I don't want to spend too long on the history here, because if I wanted to be boring, I'd become a history teacher. So here's the quick version. Caesar dies, Rome falls apart, civil wars happen, the Roman Empire forms, the Roman Empire eventually collapses, Europe gets rearranged, countries change, languages change, people migrate, and eventually America is formed. And then years later, humanity creates its most deceitful invention, basketball. But basketball did not just appear out of nowhere. No, it was given to us by one of the great philosophers of the modern world, a man whose name belongs to Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. Meet Kett Bol. Most people don't know Kett Bol because schools are too afraid to teach the truth. They'll teach you about Magna Carta, teach you about the Constitution, teach you about photosynthesis, but they won't teach you about the man who wrote basketball. I don't mean he wrote about basketball. I mean he wrote basketball. The entire concept, all of it, comes from Kett Bol. However, Kett Bol was more than a philosopher. He was a genius inventor. He invented baskets. He invented the ball. He invented dribbling. He conceptualized the very first rebound. And because Caesar died, the chain of events that eventually created Kett Bol was allowed to happen, which means without Julius Caesar's assassination, there is no basketball. No NBA, no finals, no Knicks, no Spurs. Well, this is where things get suspicious, because one team in this series had a much deeper connection to Caesar than anyone realized: the San Antonio Spurs. At first, I thought the Spurs were just a basketball team. A normal franchise, 5 championships, great organization, a young superstar, all that boring documentary stuff. But then I discovered something disturbing. Something that changes everything.
Hey, Squidward, one more thing. We're playing San Antonio rules.
San Antonio rules?
Check.
Run that back.
San Antonio rules.
San Antonio style. Not New York style. Not normal basketball. San Antonio style. Now, some people might say, that's just a random SpongeBob joke, but those people are innocent. They still believe the world makes sense. But this is where the case gets even worse. Because Sandy Cheeks is not just some random squirrel. Sandy Cheeks is from Texas. And do you know who else is from Texas? The San Antonio Spurs. So when Sandy says, we're playing basketball, San Antonio style, that's not an outsider making an observation. That is a Texas native giving us insider information. She wasn't joking. She was whistleblowing. When Sandy says San Antonio style, I highly doubt she's talking about geography. I think she's talking about method. Because Rome was not exactly known for peaceful conflict resolution. Rome had politics. Rome had betrayal. Rome had public violence. Rome had entire groups of people surrounding one man and deciding, as the team that he was done. And somehow, over 2,000 years later, that same energy appeared in the 2026 NBA Finals. Now watch what happens when we apply this to the Spurs.
That seemed to rally and wake up Zerbiak.
San Antonio rules.
Josh Hart with the push of the basketball and then gets pushed by Cornette. Not a lot of bump, but look, a lot on the line. You expect emotions to be high.
Check.
Ripped by Bowen. Carter, with a little history on the line, goes after Bowen. Lawrence Frank is a
San Antonio rules.
Every time the Spurs got physical, Sandy's warning became more accurate. It stopped feeling like a joke. It started feeling like a prophecy. And then Game 3 happened. The Knicks were up 2-0. New York was rolling. The Spurs were desperate. San Antonio needed a win. And suddenly, the series got physical. This is where Victor Wembanyama comes in. And then in Game 3, we get the moment. Pause. Zoom in. Replay. Slow motion. That is Jalen Brunson. That is Victor Wembanyama. This behavior is not what Kett Bol intended when he invented the ball.
San Antonio rules.
Suddenly, Sandy doesn't sound so crazy anymore. Actually, Sandy sounds like the only person brave enough to warn us. 25 years before the 2026 NBA Finals, Sandy Cheeks told the world exactly what was coming. And we all ignored her. All because she was just a squirrel in her diving suit. But she was right. The Spurs won Game 3, the series was alive, and San Antonio had survived. But then I found something even worse.
Only the fourth turnover, Brunson. And the ball kicked by Wembanyama.
At first, I didn't believe what I was seeing, so I watched it again.
Brunson. And the ball.
And again.
Brunson. And the ball.
And again.
Brunson.
Why is he kicking it? Basketballs are generally thrown, sometimes dribbled, occasionally passed, but rarely kicked. That's not basketball. That's something else. That is a man breaking the laws instituted by Kett Bol. And when I saw this, everything clicked. This was not random. This was not an accident. This was not just a team getting desperate. This was an inside job. Exhibit A. Julius Caesar is betrayed by the Senate. Exhibit B. Caesar's death eventually leads to basketball. Exhibit C. Kett Bol invents the ball. Exhibit D. Sandy Cheeks, a Texan, warns us about San Antonio style. Exhibit E. The Spurs start getting physical. Exhibit F. Wemby kicks the basketball. At this point, this is no longer a theory. This is an investigation. The Spurs were not playing basketball. They were reenacting history. Because this series wasn't just affected by Caesar's assassination. It became Caesar's assassination. Think about it. Caesar was powerful. And the Spurs are powerful. Caesar had enemies. The Spurs had New York. Caesar thought he was safe. The Spurs thought a 29-point lead was safe. Game 4 is when the whole thing becomes undeniable. The Spurs had the Knicks down by 29. 29! That is not a lead, that's a funeral. At that point, the Spurs were Caesar walking into the Senate, completely unaware that history was about to unfold on him like a lawn chair. And then the Knicks start coming back. One basket, another basket, a stop, a rebound, another bucket. The crowd wakes up. The Spurs start panicking. The lead is shrinking. The pressure's building. And then suddenly, the Senators are circling. Every Knicks possession was another stab. Every defensive stop was another stab. Every missed Spurs shot was another stab. And by the time OG Anunoby tips the ball in, the assassination is complete. The Spurs collapse and the Knicks take Game 4. And Caesar is on the floor again. Except this time, he's wearing black and silver. Now the Knicks are up 3-1. The Spurs are not dead yet. But medically speaking, when you're stabbed 22 times, the 23rd isn't probably going to go so great. Which brings us to Game 5. San Antonio had one last chance. One last chance to save the series. One last chance to break the prophecy. One last chance to defeat the Knicks, Sandy Cheeks, Kett Bol, and the ghost of Roman political violence. And they failed. The Knicks won. The New York Knicks are the NBA champions. For the first time since 1973, the Knicks had won. And now we can finally answer the question, did Julius Caesar's assassination affect the 2026 NBA Finals? Yes, without a doubt, obviously. Without Caesar's death, Rome changes differently. Without Rome changing differently, history changes differently. Without history changing differently, Kett Bol may never write basketball. Without Kett Bol, there is no ball. No basket, no Knicks, no Spurs, no Sandy warning us about San Antonio style, no Wemby kick, no Game 3, no Game 4 assassination reenactment, no Knicks championship. Historians will tell you Julius Caesar's death transformed Rome, but historians are cowards, because the real legacy of Julius Caesar was not the Roman Empire. It was not the fall of the Republic. It was not his name becoming a title for emperors. His real legacy was waiting over 2,000 years for the perfect moment. The moment where the New York Knicks would line up across from the San Antonio Spurs. The moment when Caesar would return, not as a Roman dictator, but as a Spurs fan. And the moment when the Knicks would finish what the Senate started. So congratulations, Knicks fans. You've waited 53 years. You survived pain. You survived disappointment. You survived decades of misery. And in the end, all it took was Jalen Brunson, OG Anunoby, the ghost of Julius Caesar, a Texan squirrel, and the teachings of Kett Bol. The Knicks are champions, the Spurs are Caesar, the Senators won, and Sandy Cheeks tried to warn us.